Since the dawn of warfare, soldiers have used the cover of night to conceal their actions. But with the advent of new technologies, the cover of darkness has been stripped away by the electronic eye. Darkness has long limited the ability of armed forces to conduct night operations. In the past, artificial light such as searchlights or flares could help open the curtain of darkness. Sound detectors were also tried, but these techniques were cumbersome and frequently ineffective. The first technology to open night skies was radar, which was developed shortly before the Second World War. Radar is like an electronic searchlight. A beam of electromagnetic energy is transmitted, and some of the beam reflects back to the antenna, where it is focused and analyzed. Radar does not provide an actual image of the target, but rather an electronic indication of where the target is located. Radar could operate day or night in nearly all weather conditions. Radar's added advantage was that it could see for hundreds of miles, not only opening up night skies, but extending the battlefield in daytime beyond human eyesight. Radars could track bombers otherwise hidden by the dark or by clouds, and could direct anti-aircraft guns with improved accuracy.
Radar was a revolution to people. For the first time, something could see beyond where you were, beyond your sight, night or day. You could look out hundreds of miles. It changed the entire face of warfare, especially air warfare, because until then, the real problem was when would you find the airplane coming at you? With radar, you could detect him hundreds of miles away if he's at high altitude. You could prepare to attack him with fighters. Also, at night, radar could see when no one else could. Radar made an enormous difference.
Early radars were large and cumbersome, only practical as ground stations or onboard large warships. Ground-based radars were used mainly for air defense. As revolutionary as these radars proved to be, they were even more significant in naval warfare.
Radar changed naval warfare in profound ways. First is naval air warfare. If you go back to the 1930s, what you find is that virtually any navy in the world believes that air attacks are unstoppable. The reason they're unstoppable is that the airplanes appear so quickly that it's impossible to launch friendly fighters to stop them. You can't keep the friendly fighters orbiting waiting for an attack because there just isn't enough fuel in the entire world. Once the shipboard people can detect aircraft very far away, then they can launch airplanes, they can marshal airplanes, airplanes can be brought into play. Now, at sea there's something else. The ships are moving in some complicated way. In the past, using lookouts, someone could deduce what was happening. Radar gave a picture of what was happening with no lookouts. The picture was good day or night. If the picture was used properly, a fleet could fight at night in ways that were never conceivable before. Now, that's in addition to other things. Radar is also used to direct gunfire and directed blind. For example, in 1943, the British sink a German battleship called the Scharnhorst. That entire engagement happens at night. No one sees very clearly. It's all done by radar. The German ship is destroyed by radar. The British commander sees what's happening almost completely by radar because it's far beyond visual range. So radar changes what they can do. It makes for a 24-hour day where in some places there would have been a 0-hour day in the north where it's dark all the time in winter. Totally revolutionary.
Radars were first mounted in aircraft in World War II, mainly to allow night fighters to find their targets in the dark. These early radar fighters were large, since the complex radars required a second crewman to operate them. Aircraft radar reached maturity in the 1950s as electronic miniaturization permitted improved radars to be mounted in single-seat fighters. Radar gave fighters the ability not only to see the enemy at night, but also to detect them in daytime at ranges far beyond human eyesight. Today, radars are the eyes of nearly every type of fighter aircraft. They are also used to guide the fighters' weapons, such as missiles. Radars have revolutionized the modern combat aircraft. Radar was a major technological advance, but it worked better in some situations than in others. Radar is best in detecting a target that stands out clearly from its background. Aircraft stand out very clearly from the sky behind them. Ships reflect radar energy much better than the water. During World War II, the environment where radar had the least impact was ground combat.
If you go back to World War II, radars are not cheap. They don't exist in unbelievable numbers. Now, in a naval operation, you have relatively few ships. The ships are expensive. Each ship can be fitted with radar, no problems. If you go to a land battle, land warfare is a war of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of tanks and millions of people. And to equip each of those tanks or each small number of people with a radar is prohibitively expensive. Furthermore, if you look at the land itself, you have hills, you have ravines. Radar is not very good at getting past that kind of obstacle. So you find very little interest in radar on land in World War II.
A tank silhouetted on the horizon makes a good radar target since it stands out from its background, as we see here on this radar simulation. But a tank under more typical conditions, such as with trees in the background, is a difficult target for radar. The trees reflect the radar almost as well as the tank, so the tank is effectively invisible to radar. Because of the inherent limitations of radar, a new sensor technology was needed to allow armies to fight at night.
The Germans did some development work in World War II, but it wasn't really until after that period when a number of nations did start having active infrared night vision equipment, and that did give them the capability to see in night conditions. It did give the tank gunner the ability to engage targets out to a limited range under night conditions. In addition, the commander also had an infrared searchlight, and of course the driver had infrared headlights, so he could see perhaps 60 or 80 meters, but it was really first generation stuff and did in fact have a number of tactical disadvantages.
Infrared searchlights projected a beam of light at night invisible to the human eye. This infrared light could be picked up by special sights on the tank called metascopes, which translated the invisible infrared light back into light that could be perceived by normal eyesight.
Basically, the hardware itself looked very much like searchlights, both large and small. And the idea was that you just pointed them at the target you were trying to illuminate, and the infrared beam came out, but it came out at a frequency which was not visible to the normal human eye. But it worked very well. If you had an infrared receiver, you could see quite clearly night to turn into day, literally. The disadvantage was that the enemy, if he had an infrared detector, he could see where you were, and you didn't stay around the battlefield very long after that. But infrared does have its place. It's good, it's relatively cheap, and the technology is good and well-founded, and it definitely works.
Active infrared night fighting systems were used with limited success in the 1973 Mideast War. But a more subtle approach to night vision was needed. Animals which hunt at night, such as owls and cats, have eyes far more sensitive to faint light than human eyes. Very few nights are totally dark. There is light from the moon and light from the stars. Engineers attempted to mimic the sensitive eyes of night predators with a new electronic sensor, the image intensification sight, also called the starlight scope.
It works on the principle that the real pitch black, cat in a coal hole type of darkness just does not exist. Even on the darkest night there is some light which can be amplified. That is amplified in the same way as you're using a microphone to amplify sound. You just amplify the amount of light to such an extent is that it becomes visible to a suitable receptor.
Starlight scopes collect and focus faint light through a lens. This light passes through an image intensification tube, multiplying each photon of light thousands of times to make the image visible to humans.
The idea is you must have these amplifying tubes, as they call them, inside the device, and they just will amplify 2, 3, 4, 5,000 times the amount of light, so that as you look through the lens of your sight, you see as though you're looking at day. They do have certain disadvantages, though, because the amplification, as you amplify sound, you get distortion. so you get visible distortion. So you have to learn to identify what you're looking at. A tank may not look exactly like a tank under normal vision systems, and it has the disadvantage too on many of the earlier types. Say, for instance, a flare went off suddenly, that would be amplified 2,000 or 3,000 times too, so your whole picture would be completely blanked out, and on some of the early systems, and some of the modern ones, you'd actually wreck the amplification circuits.
In spite of these technical problems, the new image intensification sights are a big improvement over the old infrared systems. They are entirely passive and so cannot be detected by enemy forces, as had been the older infrared searchlights. Image intensification sights were first applied to tanks as a substitute for the old infrared searchlights. They could be used to aim the main gun at night. The driver was given an image intensification periscope which allowed him to drive at night. As the technology improved, image intensification sights became smaller and smaller. They can be fitted on weapons much like a telescopic sight. The most compact versions could even be fitted to a face mask for individual soldiers.
These are PVS-7 7 Bravo night vision goggles, and they are a passive night vision device that allows you to see good distances at night. And they particularly pick up light sources, and so useful for observing signals and moving to those. In the desert, navigation is very tough. Right now we're operating in a zero illumination condition, and so everything that we can use to enhance our night capability is good. We also have these on our vehicle drivers, we have them on our dismounted forces, and so we're operable at night. And many times it's much easier to operate at night than it is during the day because of the singular light sources that these things are able to pick out. I would say also that in some of my key command and control vehicles I have mounted infrared searchlights so that with the PVS-7s we can signal one another and quickly affect link-ups and things like that. So I'm high on them.
Starlight scopes made night operations possible. But even the best image intensification sights had problems because they were dependent on moonlight and starlight. On overcast nights or in dense foliage, they became blind. Their range was often very short. Some other technology was needed. What source of energy was out there, even at night, that could be turned into a visual image? Engineers realized that heat could be detected by thermal imagers.
What the thermal imager does, it detects heat. Now this means that a target like a tank or a soft-skin vehicle, even if it's been standing for 12 hours or more, the engine will still be relatively warm, and that can be detected by a thermal imager. A tank gun will give off heat, a tank engine will give off heat, so will the suspension, the tracks, all these things can give a thermal image, and they can really show up quite well, not only in dark conditions, in fog, in poor light, in drizzle, as it is at the moment, and it really works extremely well.
A thermal imaging system acts like a thermal camera, seeing heat instead of light. Humans are warmer than the natural background and so are easily visible to a thermal imager. Even when not operating, tanks and other vehicles collect heat from the sun during daytime and give off heat at nighttime as they cool, so they can be seen. The temperature from these various objects is different from the natural background, allowing the thermal imager to distinguish one from the other.
Not only can you see vehicles at long range, if a vehicle is camouflaged, a thermal sight will probably see through that camouflage. It will also see through dusk, smoke and other battlefield obstacles. If an enemy vehicle lays a smoke screen, if you have II sights, you will not see the vehicle. With a thermal night observation device, you will actually be able to see through that smoke, you will be able to see the vehicle and you'll be able to engage it, and that is a considerable tactical advantage.
A thermal imager works by cooling its sensor array. The complexity of this technology meant that they were very expensive, up to $250,000 each. Their size, complexity, and cost limited their use to high-value weapons systems such as main battle tanks, missile launchers, and helicopters. But their advantages over older night vision systems was enormous. Although they were originally conceived as night sights, it soon became apparent that thermal images had wider applications, even in daytime. When modern tank guns fire, they kick up an enormous amount of dust and smoke in front of the tank. When this happens, it becomes very difficult for the tank gunner to see whether he has hit his target. Thermal images can often see through this visual obstruction. The modern battlefield is apt to be a very murky place. There is the problem of dust kicked up by the tanks. There is the smoke of burning vehicles. There is mist and fog. And there is smoke deliberately used by armies to conceal their positions. Thermal images provided a key technological edge, as was so evident in Operation Desert Storm.
The thermal sight, when you've trained a gunner and a crew well, they can identify vehicles at quite a range with the thermal sight. It's always been an advantage to us versus other countries' armor capabilities, and we've been very jealous about keeping that. We're very pleased with it. We use it out here very much to train the tank crews at night, and we shoot a complete half of the qualification run is shot at night to ensure that the crews are able to use that. And yes, we did use it. And we were able to hit targets in Iraq, and they really didn't know where it was coming from, and they had no way to see us because their passive night sights just weren't capable of that.
Helicopters have become the workhorses of the modern battlefield. Whether used for carrying troops or firing weapons, their mobility and speed make them invaluable. But helicopters are vulnerable to ground fire. Night operations help protect helicopters from enemy fire. As in the case of ground forces, radar was not well suited to Army helicopters due to the same technical problems with ground clutter. In the 1970s, helicopter crews began to use image intensification night sights for night flying. For more demanding missions, something better was needed. Thermal imaging was a natural choice. The AH-64 Apache was the first helicopter fitted with a full thermal imaging sensor package. As in the case of tanks, the thermal imaging sights on the Apache made them a devastating adversary during Operation Desert Storm. The thermal imaging sights allowed the Apache crews to accurately locate and target Iraqi tanks and vehicles from 5 miles away. The attacks came without warning, giving the Iraqis no time to fire back at the Apaches. Warplanes continue to use radar as their primary electronic sensor. It still offers better range than electro-optical sights. But for certain types of missions, especially ground attack, thermal imaging supplements radar. The main advantage of the thermal imager is its ability to see fine detail on the ground. One of the aircraft to pioneer thermal imaging was the F-111F. It uses a thermal imaging system in a special attack pod mounted under the belly called PaveTac. The F-15E Strike Eagle carries a compact new thermal imaging system, part of its Lantern Strike package. The versatility and accuracy offered by these pods was clearly demonstrated during Operation Desert Storm. Protected under the veil of night, the attacking Allied aircraft were far less vulnerable to Iraqi anti-aircraft fire. Even in total darkness, they could hit their targets with pinpoint accuracy. The F-15E Strike Eagle incorporates the latest trends in aircraft electronic sensors. Besides its thermal imaging pod, the F-15E is fitted with a new generation of radar called synthetic aperture radar. Such a radar provides the crew with far better detail than conventional radar, though certainly not with the detail of a thermal imaging system. For aircraft, radar remains a valuable tool due to its range and its superior ability to see through thick cloud cover compared to thermal images. The most sophisticated of the new generation of ground surveillance radars is incorporated into the E8 Joint Stars. Joint Stars is used to reconnoiter an entire sector of the battlefield. Its radar is not intended to be precise enough to target single tanks. Rather, it provides the combat commander with an overview of the whole battlefield, showing the location of major enemy troop concentrations.
During the Gulf War, Joint Stars was very prominent. Those radars couldn't have done the job earlier because there are so many objects on the land, they have to be separated out. You need a very powerful computer to do that job. In the past, no computers, well in World War II certainly no computers, therefore the radar picture was very difficult to interpret. Therefore, if you look at the way radar is used, you find that there's a very low limit to how many objects a radar system can handle simultaneously. One of the big revolutions in using radar after World War II is to insert computers which can keep track of all of those objects. That's a tremendous change also.
Night vision sensors have made modern warfare a 24-hour endeavor. Armies no longer have the cover of night to rest and recuperate. There is no time of day to hide from the electronic eyes.